Many executives, when they're starting out in their board career, will often navigate towards the not-for-profit sector. And it is, without a shadow of a doubt, a wonderful sector to make an effort to contribute in. It's an opportunity to give back. And for some of you, it might be an opportunity to build really relevant, quality board experience. However, there are some pitfalls, and I've been through a couple of processes myself recently which highlighted a number of the challenges that you can often face in the not-for-profit sector from a board member perspective. Because most of these positions are often volunteer, you will often get a lack of commitment to boardroom attendance, to undertaking extra additional responsibilities and so on. I had a recent sort of situation where I went along to a recruitment panel. There were meant to be a couple of people there, but several of the board members had excused themselves. They were busy with other activity, and so they didn't turn up. So recruitment wasn't a priority for this particular board. That can happen, consistently across all operations of the board. So there may be attendance at the official meetings, but the extra work that has to happen around that organisation from a board director level just isn't occurring. So one of the screening points you should add to your checklist, if you like, before you join a not-for-profit board is really understanding people's commitment to the board, their time commitment, how much time are they giving to the board, because often you'll find as a new board member coming into an organisation, suddenly everything drops onto your desk because you're the new kid on the block. And you really ideally want a board where the workload is equally shared amongst board members. You don't have people who just have it on their CV so that it looks nice. People are actually turning up, they're engaged, and they're giving the extra work that needs to happen to make these organisations a success. The other issue you need to watch is very carefully assessing the finances of the business. These not-for-profits, many of the charities are borderline in my opinion. They've got very low revenues, they're highly reliant on government grants, and one wrong move and they could be in real peril. So you have to have a real clear line of sight into how the organisation generates its revenues. What are their cost to expense ratios, and if they're a charity, what are their cost to giving ratios looking like? Because many of these organisations literally take $1 million in, $1 million out, goes out in costs, and very little left over to actually achieve anything. So you really want to get a handle on the finances, because some of these organisations are going to have to merge in order to survive. They're going to have to rethink their revenue models in order to survive, and government grants could become very, very volatile in the future. So what has happened in the past might not be a very good predictor of the future. And that NDIS sector, for example, is a good way to look at things. There is going to be some radical changes that happen across that sector. You will see some of the smaller operators phased out. So, you really have to have a handle on the finances. And then finally, you have to have a really clear line of sight into how the organisation handles fundraising, donations, and so on. Raising funds in certainly in charities is not simple. It's not easy, but you need to be really confident that they have good mechanisms in place. And a good way to sort of test them out, if you like, is make a donation. Just see how that whole flow occurs from beginning to end as a consumer. So if you were to donate to an organisation, what would be the flow of the funds? Now, recently I donated to a charity that I was doing some due diligence on, and I found out that the funds were not going to the charity. They were going to a third party, and the third party would in turn grant the money back to the charity. That process was a bit convoluted in terms of timing. It could take weeks, maybe months. And in the meanwhile, as a donor, I didn't get a thank you, I didn't get an acknowledgement, I didn't get a we really appreciate your support. No written correspondence at all. So that for me is very much a flawed fundraising model, because there's a huge disconnect between the charity and the donor. So, you have to just get under the hood of how the businesses operate, how they're interacting with their employees, with their volunteers, with their stakeholders, with their constituents, with their donors. And you have to go into these organisations eyes wide open. A lot of these organisations have, the old guard on the not-for-profit boards, and, they're not always willing to change. They might talk a good talk. So you have to also just finally assess willingness to change, willingness to adopt new ways of doing things. It is a very valid career pathway. It can be a very, very exciting opportunity, but you must do your reconnaissance. You must do your due diligence and treat it just like any commercial board opportunity. Look at it with commercial eyes, because ultimately, if it's not successful financially, if it's not successful in how it's operating, that will have an impact on your board journey with that organisation and the types of problems you're likely to experience when you're serving on that board.